Why do we have controversies about pronouns? Why is this not a simple thing? And what are those controversies that you sometimes wade into?
Well, we don't like change, for one thing. And pronouns have a way of changing because all words generally do. But if a pronoun's changing, you feel like somebody's playing with your fingers. So it's not like just change in fashion with clothes. It's somebody's playing with your fingers, or they're telling you to not use the middle finger on your right hand all day. And you're trying not to, but it's really hard. And so there are all sorts of controversies.
Never miss an episode of Stay Tuned. Hit that subscribe button now. If you'd like to support our work, consider becoming an insider. You'll get exclusive access to my weekly podcast with Joyce Vance, where we break down the biggest legal and political stories and other membership benefits. Head to cafe.com/insider to learn more and to join. That's cafe.com/insider. Professor John McWhorter, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I congratulate you on this book, Pronoun Trouble. For those watching on YouTube, you can see it. The story of us in 7 little words. Can I ask you a preliminary question?
Of course.
Why study language?
Because it is something that we think is just stringing words together that is really so much more complicated, so much more elegant, so much more interesting than we have any reason to think it would be. That's why I study it. Some people would say because it expresses the soul, et cetera, I can pretend. But really, it's just that it's a fascinating system. And we think we're just putting words together.
Were you fascinated by language when you were young?
Very. I have a twist. There's something wrong with me. When I was 4, I had never heard another language. I didn't grow up in a neighborhood where there happened to be any Latinos. So I just thought you talked. I don't think I even knew what English was. And then there was this Israeli girl, and she started talking to her parents, and I was just blown away that this normal person who I knew could talk in a way where all of a sudden I couldn't understand.
Anything.
And as I've gotten older, I've realized that most kids wouldn't have cared about that. And why would they? They would just figure, I can't understand her. There must be something other than English. But for me, I was jealous. I felt left out. I wanted to be able to do this second thing the way she could. And that really is the heart of why I like languages even now.
So I did not grow up to become a linguist. And I did have a second language in the home. Actually, a couple of other languages in the home were immigrants from India.
Which were the languages?
Hindi and Punjabi.
Mm-hmm.
And but I remember being a kid, immigrant kid in school, and I used to enjoy doing something that I don't think kids today do, which is diagramming sentences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you diagram sentences when you were in school?
No, because I was a Montessori kid where you have to learn a whole lot by osmosis. And frankly, it works for some kids and not others. But it did for me because I was a little nerd. But that meant that we learned the parts of speech. But the diagramming is something I only heard about later. I would have loved it.
I think you would have. I don't think they do the diagramming now. But you learn the parts of speech. Do you think that we need more language education as a percentage of what people who are young in grade school are doing? The amount that we have now or less?
Oh, there really needs to be more. If we could just blow it all up and start again. Linguistics shouldn't be something that you optionally learn about in college. Linguistic concepts, maybe not called that, should be taught as early as 5th grade. And maybe some of the space that is taken up by, or used to be taken up by, learning vocabulary words. I remember language arts and learning what arrogate meant, etc. I would think that actually, if we had to make space for something and leave something out, basic linguistics ideas should be taught, because otherwise what we have is an awful lot of unintentional linguistic discrimination, an awful lot of people who, for example, grow up like you and don't realize how cool Hindi and Punjabi are compared to English.
I didn't think they were.
No, it's just what you hear in the house. Whereas to me, I think, how do you put sentences together like that? We need more of that in school. It's not going to happen. It's not a priority of mine, but linguistics should be taught earlier.
Linguistics, or I guess I was asking more about just sort of general language instruction.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you mean teaching people languages?
Or teaching people English, or whatever the language is that is their primary language, here mostly English. Have you found that the quality of writing has stayed the same among college students over the years or diminished?
I haven't noticed any difference, but then the truth is I've had a rather unusual trajectory. My first school where I taught was Cornell, where students are unusually well prepared. Then at UC Berkeley, There were many students who could write on that level, many students who frankly could barely construct a grammatical sentence at all, and then everybody in the middle. Then I'm now at Columbia where everybody can write well. No matter what your background is, I have never experienced a student at Columbia who wasn't extremely deft at rubbing a noun and a verb together. So maybe I need to have had a wider representation.
I guess. So you're very lucky that you get so much clear writing. Okay, so now one of the parts of speech, which is the focus of your book, is pronouns. It's the part of speech, am I correct? It's the part of speech that has the fewest members?
Well, in our language, definitely, because we're pronoun poor. Yeah.
We're pronoun poor. What does it mean to be? First of all, do you want to describe for anyone who may not actually know what a pronoun is?
Pronouns stand in for nouns. And so my car is broken. And then you don't keep on saying car. So I took the car in and they said that the car was broken and I had to pay money for the car. You talk about it after that. It, it's missing its carburetor or something like that. Or my sister is getting married. My sister is so happy that my sister invited. No, my sister is getting married. She's so happy that she invited. And so my sister is getting married. She's so happy that she invited, etc. And so that means that we have these little words that stand in for whatever noun it is that we specified at first. That's a pronoun.
And every language has pronouns, correct?
There is no language that doesn't have any.
Because there's no language in which we kill people by saying the same noun again and again and again.
Right. Nobody would.
We are kinder than that.
We don't have time. And so, no, there's no language where there is no way to say it. Yeah.
So you divide up pronouns as to singular and plural, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I is the singular, we is the plural.
Mm-hmm.
He or she or it is the singular, and they is the plural.
Exactly.
Also by person, first person, meaning I, you, meaning the other person,
mm-hmm.
and the third person.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the way that pronouns are divided up in all languages?
No. For one thing, in a lot of languages, not only do you have the singular and the plural, but you also have the dual. And so you want to be very precise. If you want to just say you too, there'll be a word for that. Or we too, as opposed to me and three other people. There are languages where you have to specify the gender, not only with he and she, but with the word for you and often with the word for I. You can take it all so much further than in English, where all we've basically got is I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. It's kind of not enough, and it trips us up sometimes.
We're going to get into that. Is there a word for, I have to do this, sir, is there a word for we few? We happy few?
There's no single word that I'm aware of. Be nice.
All right. Otherwise, Shakespeare would have used that.
Yes.
Instead of we happy few.
Although if Shakespeare had lived a little earlier, he would have known a word like yeet, which meant you too. And that was, you had thou, that's one you, and then you is y'all, and then yeet is you two. That was gone by the time he was around, but it had only been gone for about 300 years.
So when you say we're pronoun poor, we don't distinguish among various kinds of designations, right? So we say you.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know if that means one person, if it means 20 people, if it means two people. We don't know if it's, we just don't know. In other languages, we also don't have a respectful you and a casual you like we have in Spanish, which is one of the languages that I learned growing up. Does that say something about the cultures in which English is spoken? Is there a reason why we became pronoun impoverished, and does it matter?
The truth is, it really isn't what we kind of want it to be. Like, I would love to be able to say the reason that we're so pronoun poor is that there's something about being an English speaking person, probably somewhere around 1500. Here's how the culture matches how the language changed. But the truth is, it's a fascinating mystery. It's something that happens to standard English much more than to the rural Englishes that nobody hears. There's still people in rural England who use thou. It's usually tha, but they're still using it. But in the cities, it disappeared, and there wasn't really anything going on in English cities that wasn't going on in Russian cities, French cities, Swedish cities.
Yeah, so what gives?
English is a language that kind of likes to take it light, and the reasons for it start with the fact that Vikings beat it up starting in 787 AD, and then basically a sense developed in this language that you don't want to use more detail than you need. Exactly why that happened has never been discovered, but it's very clear in how English just kind of becomes this linguistic stripper starting in early Middle English, and still is. in many ways. And it means that for some reason, English loses its pronouns. There's just this general trend toward lightness, whereas in other languages, the normal number of pronouns was kept to a much larger extent and new ones developed, but not in English.
I was always told, but now you'll confirm it because you're the expert, that English was a very rich language in the sense that there were more unique words in English than in either any other language or most other languages. Is that true or false?
Yeah, that is an idea that comes from the fact that we have brought in words, especially from French and Latin, so that you get sandwiches. Like you can say help, that's an original English word. You can say aid, that's French. You can say assist, and that's Latin. And those three things have slightly different meanings. And then help out means something different altogether. And so there are all of these ways of saying help because we've borrowed all these words. Now, the problem with it is, it's like we can say, I keep on bursting bubbles here, but we can say English has got the bigger vocabulary, but it's never necessarily been proven that there is no way I'm going to take Russian randomly, in Russian that you can't convey the difference between help and aid and assist. In Old English, there were ways of conveying differences like that, where these foreign words came in and replaced the old ones, but it's not that it gave us new ways of doing things. So it's very hard to say. English has a massive vocabulary partly because we can preserve our language in a large book called a dictionary, whereas in a language spoken in the rainforest, whatever words kind of go out of use just become forgotten in a couple of generations. We have words that we don't use, like ruthless. We know what ruthless means. Well, there's technically a word ruth. There isn't, but it's in the dictionary. So
it's whatever without Ruth.
Right. It's mercy, but who's ever said, please show me Ruth?
Right. Well, the reason I asked the question is we seem to be vocabulary rich at the same time we are pronoun poor. And I just wondered if there was a theory about that.
There isn't. It's that the pronouns are used very heavily, and we are not interested in having a proliferation of them the way many languages.
So the pronoun issue is one thing. I find myself telling people from time to time, we talked about my Indian heritage. Here's a category of word that's not pronoun, but is the terms that we use for our relatives. So in English, there's uncle and there is aunt. In India, let me tell you, and maybe this is true in many societies, there is a word for uncle on your mother's side, uncle on your father's side, older uncle on your father's side, younger uncle on your father's side, older sister on your, on and on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
With great, you say in-law, someone's my brother-in-law. In America and in English-speaking countries, you have to ask, well, is that your wife's brother or is that your sister's husband? Do you have a theory about that? Why in certain cultures, the specificity of the relation is so important that there's a separate word for it and we don't have that in English?
I'd have to fly by the seat of my pants, but it's definitely true that...
Did I stump the professor?
Pretty much, but you're correct. Western Europe is very light on words for family members for the most part. It feels so normal to us to just say uncle, aunt. But as soon as you step beyond Western Europe, even in Eastern Europe, even in the Slavic languages, you have to be more specific. And the further east you go from there, so for example, the Indian languages are a great example, but Chinese is the same way. The Southeast Asian languages are the same way. And then, as you move down into Australia, if you think about Native American languages, it's normal to have a different word for different in-laws of different sexes, etc. Western Europe doesn't do it. And my guess is that it has something to do with the development of bourgeois societies and capitalism there, where there's somewhat less of a focus on just the family as opposed to the larger community, because capitalism creates that artificial way of thinking. Because there must be a reason why Western Europe just says cousin, whereas that would be unthinkable in, I'm going to seat of my pants. That's probably not true of most of the world's languages. It's a Western European thing to be that blank about family names in that sense and relations.
Can we make a normative judgment about that, or is it just descriptive?
I just describe it, but I'm sure that many people would say that it suggests a lack of warm family feeling, etc.
Okay, so we have some foundation on pronouns. Your book is called Pronoun Trouble. Can we get into the controversies relating to pronouns now, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have controversies about pronouns? Why is this not a simple thing? And what are those controversies that you sometimes wade into?
Well, we don't like change, for one thing. And pronouns have a way of changing because all words generally do. But if a pronoun's changing, you feel like somebody's playing with your fingers. So it's not like just change in fashion with clothes. It's somebody's playing with your fingers, or they're telling you to not use the middle finger on your right hand all day. And you're trying not to, but it's really hard. And so there are all sorts of controversies. I mean, for this book, I think everybody knows that one of the ones that I cover is going to be the one about the new usage of they. But really, on the other hand, there were people who didn't like it when you started being used in the singular and thou fell away in standard English. And even now, we are told that it's wrong to say Billy and me went to the store, when really that was a change that happened in English starting about 400 years ago for reasons that are about what English is like. And yet, because around that time, a certain group of people told us that English was supposed to have grammar like Latin's, we think there's something wrong with Billy and me went to the store, because in Latin you would put it as Billy and I went to the store. And we don't think about the fact that in French you have to say Billy and me went to the store, and nobody there has any
Professor,
problem.
You teach at a school of higher learning.
I try.
And presumably you grade papers. We talked about that a minute ago. If you're in fourth grade and you write Billy and me are going to the store, should you be marked off for that or not?
You have to be, because what the fourth grader needs to know is that there's something that we do in formal situations just because we do. Kind of like you wear a top hat in a certain era, or, whatever jacket people are wearing now. But it's not because it makes no sense to say Billy and me went to the store. That's the way I would teach it. That there's certain formalities that you have to observe. You have to put on deodorant, but understand that the way that you want to say it or the way you want to write it is not wrong. It's just not appropriate for certain situations.
But then later you can take license.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so when you write your short story, when you're in college, you can say Billy and me.
Yeah, because that's what your character would actually say. Yeah.
But your narrator can say that too.
Probably, if the narrator is implied to be that kind of character. Yeah.
So let's talk about, so I went to a small private school in New Jersey that I've given to and I support. I got a great education there, but there were some shortcomings. One of the shortcomings was not instruction in English. And we had a very proud headmaster who founded the school. His name was Russell G. Ranney. He would personally come. He wore a top hat, by the way, from time to time.
I'm picturing this.
He and curled mustachio, kind of a throwback. But he really believed in the importance of language instruction. He would boast that we had twice as much language instruction, English instruction, in grade school and in middle school, then called junior high, than the local public schools did, with a heavy emphasis on grammar. So it was pound, and sort of he was not a super liberal gentleman, other than with his mustachio.
Was he a round person or was he a slim person?
Slender, tall. You kind of imagine him with a cane, although I don't think he had a cane.
Was he married to anyone?
Yes. Betsy Ranney.
That's just right.
He also had, I don't know why I'm telling all these stories, and it's not a big school. He drove I think it was a lavender Mercedes onto the campus. We had a uniform, which was not uncommon in the 70s and the 80s. We also had a requirement to take ballroom dancing. So I'm giving you a sense of my.
Did Russell and Betsy have any progeny?
Yes, they did. Yes,
and it wasn't just that car.
Okay. It wasn't just that car. God bless them. But one of the things that I still remember him yelling thunderously, because he was a really big guy, really large man. And he would sometimes come into the 7th grade class and personally teach us grammar. And I will never get out of my head, even though it's 45 years ago, that you must use the singular pronoun when you say things like, the professor, assigned the reading that he thinks is best for you. You don't say he or she, you don't say they, you don't say she, even when it's not known and you're talking about a generic professor. And that was drummed into us with the fear of God. Was that right, wrong, or is it right or wrong? Was it right or wrong then? Is it different now? How has that evolved, and how do you think about the lessons of Russell G. Ranney?
Mr. Ranney was wrong. And I can completely understand what a theatrical thrill that person was. I knew somebody like that too around the same time.
Was it larger than life figure? Yes.
And, the authority that he would have conveyed, practically the rolled R's and, always a certain air of intellectual menace. I get it. But he was wrong. There have been people using what's called singular they who were considered excellent users of the English language, really since Chaucer. And, if Defoe and Austen and Shakespeare and Thackeray can use it, if Thackeray can say, a person can't help their birth, if that's in Vanity Fair, what would Mr. Ranney have said about that? And if he really thought that it was a mistake for Thackeray to write in Vanity Fair, a person can't help their birth, well, then frankly, the question is, who was he to say it was a mistake if for hundreds and hundreds of years, speakers of the language were using it that way?
Yeah, but I'm sorry, but is that more like Billy and me in fourth grade versus when you become an esteemed writer?
Well, the truth is that with Billy and me, I know from experience, if you say Billy and me went to the store in a formal setting, a formal media setting, you're going to hear about it. Whereas if you say a person can't help their birth, nobody is going to write in, or if they do, it's probably Russell Ranney's daughter or something. It's not going to be the usual person because it's just English as it's spoken.
The more common mistake that educated and, dare I say, erudite people make is not Billy and me went to the store. They'll say, please join Billy and I when we go to the store. Because they have been taught, or they think they've been taught, that me is always incorrect and that I is more formal. Is that other formulation? Join Billy and I? Can we be disapproving of that?
Really, the whole between you and I thing. And, even Obama uses it often with, Michelle and I, if somebody sent a letter to Michelle and I, and he'll say that. It's because
it drives me, I will just tell you that it drives me crazy.
I can imagine because of the way you were taught it. Really, I can imagine.
Because of my tortured youth.
Me being a Montessori kid is that nobody taught that stuff. And so I kind of missed developing any kind of feeling about it. And then only learned later that you're supposed to use these locutions.
Did that better qualify you to become a linguistics professor, neutral, or less qualify you?
Better, to be honest, because it really means I didn't grow up with the blackboard grammar. But the thing is, with between you and I have pity because
we may have to end the interview, sir.
Because the truth is that the Billy and I rule is so unnatural. We use me as the subject in so many contexts. So, for example, who broke that lamp? Me. Well, you would never say me broke it. Just there's so many places in the language where you use me as a subject that a person taught this Billy and I rule just kind of thinks, okay, you have to use I after and that means between you and I. I see that in some of the most formal contexts. I've heard it on National Public Radio. It's an unlearnable rule, frankly. And that's why people say between you and I.
Just to rescue the situation from my old school, there was a classmate of mine who was roundly made fun of, even though we had this indoctrination from Mr. Ranney, because when she would knock on the door,
oh God,
and someone said, "Who is it?" she would say, "It is I."
Right.
So the rest of us, even with that indoctrination, thought that was a bridge too far.
Yes, and it's one of those things where if that is a bridge too far, and it's funny, way back, the people who were saying that we should use I and me as subject and object, the grand old idea, they would say, it is I as an exception, because in Old English, you would even say it is me. And there's a reason why you would say it in Old English. But yeah, that person who said it is I'll bet they didn't date much. And that's because the rule doesn't make any sense.
I don't know how you made that leap, sir. I will leave that one aside. So there's another meaning of they in modern times that you have opined on and have a suggestion for. And that is not when you are trying to be ungendered, as between a male teacher or a female teacher or some other reason, but when you're referring to someone who is non-binary. And you have expressed the legitimate feeling of confusion as a reading matter about, well, who are we talking about when you're talking about they? Could you explain what that issue is and what your modest proposal is?
Well, we have no real choice but to use they as the non-binary pronoun. You can't just make up a pronoun. They're too deeply seated. So we have to use something we have. And, I, we, you would not make any sense. You can't use it. That's not the way English works. And so it has to be they, but it can be confusing. And it can be confusing in casual speech. I would say it's more confusing often in writing. And I've noticed some enlightened and progressive writings over the past few years using the new they, where you keep getting tripped up. And this is even with some of the best copy editors on earth. And I thought one thing that would make it easier is if when we're using non-binary they, we just capitalize the T. Because then you can just know immediately that it's the new they as opposed to they, several people. And it would just make the reading experience smoother. Now, it wouldn't work at the beginning of a sentence, but then again, we could consider it part of good editing to make sure it doesn't wind up at the beginning of a sentence and places like that become a very strunk and whitish thing. But I think that would just make all of the transition easier.
So I'm going to come back to Strunk and White. I don't know if you took their name in vain or not. Because that was an assigned Bible when I was young.
Randy would have loved that. Yeah.
But you when I first read your proposal about capitalizing they, I'm like, well, that's silly. And then I saw you being asked that question the other day, and you had a really good rejoinder. I never thought of it. Well, why the hell do we capitalize I?
Mm-hmm.
We don't capitalize he, she, it.
No.
They, them. Why do we capitalize I?
For some antique reason, as in it used to be that print either didn't exist or it was rare. And so everything is handwritten by some monk. And I was one little scratch. If you think about it, there's no dot yet. So it's just a scratch. But then M was 3 scratches, not hooked together yet. N was 2 scratches, not hooked together yet. So if somebody's writing, even if they're pretty good at it, it was easy to think that just the I might be connected to some M or N or U around it, which was just 2 scratches. And so what you needed was a way for I to stand out because pronouns are used so often. It's smoother if you don't get stuck on the I. And so you could either put a dot on it. That's why there's a dot for the lowercase, or you could capitalize it. And that's why that happened. Both of those things settled in. And we don't really think about it anymore. Why is there a dot on the I, for example? You don't really.
I don't know. I don't know.
Because that was easier when you were writing.
Why is there a cross on the T? It's because you have to dot your I's and cross your T's because of the expression.
I like that version of causation. But yeah, so that is why the capital T would work, because we're used to the arbitrariness of capital I. We could do more.
So there are other phrases that cause controversy about gender and about, I guess it's an argument of fairness, among other things. So help us grapple with the following. I'm in a mixed group of folks, men and women, and I say you guys. Okay or not okay in your book?
Well, if I am addressing those women, I say folks. That's
I say folks all the time too.
Do you do folks too? Yeah.
I do. But I didn't do that intentionally because I was worried about guys. It's just, I don't know. I think I just happened to start using folks.
I started using folks because, call it 25 years ago, I approached a group of people who were females and I said, ladies, I was hoping that we could something. They were teaching assistants of mine. And one of them very politely said, ladies isn't great. And I said, oh, okay, I get what you mean. I'll come up with something else. And so then I started using folks because people is a little pushy. But among themselves, those same women, I'm sure, and this was probably 1996, were saying you guys. And what they meant by it was not you people with penises. What they meant was y'all. And the guys no longer has a male connotation when the women use it. Just like when they say dude to each other, they don't mean person who shaves, look over there, that interesting thing.
So I say dude, I say dude a lot. It's a product of being, I think, Gen X, growing up in the 90s. And I say it to all different kinds of people. And it has been objected to when I have used it with, for example, my wife and others. Proper objection? Or does language change and can it encompass something beyond a mere gendered reference?
It's funny. Dude might have a very sophisticated slot of meaning. It might be something that women can use among one another to mean, hey, vernacularly affectionate other person. But if a man says it, then, hey, dude, you can't. To be honest, I'd like it if men could use it because I'm thinking of it as a gender neutral word. But if women don't like it, then yeah, that's interesting. I don't use dude because I wear cardigan sweaters, but I can imagine if I did, it would
That's interesting causation too.
Yeah, it would be tricky if women did not prefer it. And I'm guessing that many women would not want to hear that from you or me. That's true. That's subtle.
When one quotes from someone in history and the quote is full of gendered language. So for example, Robert Kennedy, whenever a man strikes out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is that properly objected to? Should it be modified when quoted from in 2025? How do you feel about that issue?
Well, when I'm presenting something like that to students or quoting something in a book, I always say beforehand, it's like almost trigger warning, but it's not that dire. I just say, of course, today we would say human, or of course, today we would not say miss or something like that, but this is what the person said. I think that's enough. I wouldn't substitute what they said as if what they said was some kind of vicious slur. But for example, in lots of older things, somebody will say something about miss, and it sounds so denigrating to us now. And I'll say before it, this person's use of miss is infelicitous to us now, but I think the meaning is clear and still applicable today. And, put on your history glasses. And that'll do. Because, the further we get from earlier texts, the more of that kind of thing there's going to be. And I think we need to understand, and that also goes for the word Negro and also the word that's even more awkward. I think we need to make sure that people understand that there are history glasses that we can put on. But yeah, I say something beforehand, but I wouldn't change the text itself.
How appropriate is usage of the term that you already mentioned, y'all, if you're like me from the North?
It's getting to the point that...
Is there a rule in favor or a rule against? Is it trying too hard if I, Preet Bharara from New York and New Jersey, begin to say y'all?
No, actually, because y'all is spreading. Y'all starts as Southern/Black, but it's becoming a way for anybody anywhere in America to refer to more than one person in what's intended as a warm and colloquial way. I think that's a good thing because it's never going to get to the point that the Wall Street Journal uses y'all, but we have needed a plural you for centuries now. And so even if it's just used in the Vulgate, as one says, that's a step in the right direction.
You point out in the book something that's very adorable. I was surprised, really adorable in a book about pronouns. Well, because it was my experience with my daughter, and I thought that it was unique to her, and have been telling the story for years. And apparently, it's not unique to her, and that is when you're an infant and learning language, you think that your name is you because your parents are constantly saying, you. And so you think
let me pick you up, right?
We pick you up. And then so when your infant child says hungry, you hungry, you're like, no, I'm fine. Thank you. I don't need a sandwich. They're not saying you, they're saying I.
Exactly.
Anyway, I have no question there. That was just an interesting revelation.
That is cute, isn't it? Yeah. My daughter would say, Caillou, and that meant pick me up. Right.
Carry, right. So the issue of pronouns and asserting your pronouns, which has been something that people have done in recent years. Do you have a view on that?
It's become a marker of a certain progressive sense on how biological sex and gender identification are different. And I figure if people want to doff their cap to that, it's the same statement as me wearing a cardigan and therefore signaling that I'm kind of a writerly person, which is definitely what I'm trying to do, although I really like wearing cardigans. And I think that that's just going to settle in. And I don't do it. I don't feel like telling somebody that I'm he, him. It seems rather obvious, but especially for a lot of younger people, that's what they're going to do. I wouldn't want to see it coerced. And actually in the book, I say, are we sure that you need to specify the object form? Like I am he, him, his. Who would be he, her, theirs? Like you don't need to specify that part. So he, they, okay. But if it's just she, why not just she? And maybe I'll catch some flack for that, but I just thought I'd suggest you could abbreviate it.
Do you have any view on I don't want to presage the answer or my view by using the word being normative in this, but, policing of language, um, and arguments about quote unquote, whatever that means, policing of language, rules for words to use, not to use in bureaucracies and companies, et cetera, largely critiqued by the right for reasons that are, I think, obvious. But also we've had George Packer of The Atlantic on, who critiques it from the left, with a very interesting argument that, among other things, if you sugarcoat or make mild the sufferings of people, you're less likely to have people, other folks, I'm using folks, you're less likely to have other folks understand their plight. And so you're not doing anyone a favor, you're not doing anyone a service by trying to use duller words than are, perhaps required by the occasion. Do you have a view on that from either direction?
Well, you put it perfectly. And the truth is, it's a matter of degree. There's nothing wrong with that. We now say flight attendant instead of stewardess. There's nothing wrong with chairperson. There's nothing wrong if people who used to be called Oriental would prefer Asian. Something that comes up now and then is the way it used to be. The idea lately that you have this whole flood of terms that you're supposed to be using, and you're taught that you're behind the curve if you're not. And that came first, most notoriously from the left around 2020. Now we're seeing this ridiculous list that's come from the Trump administration from the right. Frankly, it never works. If you've got too many words at a time, then people just don't have time to attend to them. If you're making up that many, then chances are you're coming from some rather extreme, choosy, punitive ideology that is going to basically put off most people. And the general truth is that if you're creating political change, word lists have only very recently been thought of as an important way of doing it. It used to be that grassroots activism was considered hard. You have to knock on doors. You have to wear your voice out. But that's what people who made a difference did. The idea that you're going to do it by putting out word lists is something that social media makes seem attractive, and that a certain kind of charisma and hope makes seem useful. But it's really, frankly, kind of a lazy politics. It's not about word lists and telling people don't say things. It's supposed to be about changing thought. And that only works so well when you just try to change what words people use.
We were taught a phrase, I don't know if people are still taught this, and it was ostensibly meant to make us feel better about schoolyard bullies and the type of folks who would, make fun of you. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. True or false?
True. And the new idea that when someone calls you a name, they are destroying your soul and have therefore committed what we call violence or trauma. That's rather new. And things that are rather new sometimes can be valuable new insights. But in this case, I think it's a little indulgent and a little hasty and a little unhealthy, because I think we're beginning to forget in many quarters how resilient human beings are, of all colors, of all stations in life. And yeah, names will never hurt me. Now, a name thrown at you directly in your face continuously for, hours on end, we can think about that. But if somebody just says that, and you collapse and you act as if somebody speared you in the back, no, it's an act, I think.
No, you just have to beat those people in life.
Mm-hmm. That helps.
Which is my mantra. So one more story from when I was a kid. So my name is Preet Bharara. That's what I go by. But Preet is not my full proper legal name. My full proper legal name is Pretender, which not everyone knows. I don't use it for obvious reasons. I'm proud of my name. But just and my middle name is Singh. So imagine you're 7 in suburban New Jersey in 1976. And your name is, literally, it sounds like Pretender Singh.
It's not worth the trouble, yeah.
I know my dad's listening. I'm very proud of my heritage and my name, but Preet is much better. And there was a guy in my high school, I think I was a freshman, he was a sophomore. He was kind of a bully and was picking on me, but the way he picked on me was to call me Pretender. And I would object. And he would say, well, that's your name. And he would go around very ostentatiously when he was picking on me, saying Pretender this, Pretender that, Pretender, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And his legal justification, I guess, was, well, that's your freaking name. I can call you that if I want. Was he, who was in the right?
He's clearly a bully. He knows what he's doing. He's getting people laughing at you. And if I had been in your situation, I would have come up with something to call him over and over again to the point that he would probably knock it off. I remember slightly.
His name was David. It was very hard for an Indian kid to get over on a guy named David.
No, you have to make something up that's kind of stupid. Yes, my name is Pretender. But your name is Bastard. And every time he says Pretender, you just say, okay, Bastard.
I haven't followed up on him. But I hope and believe that I beat him in life.
I know what you mean. No, Inder that sequence of sounds has a meaning in the Indo-Aryan languages, and it just ends up happening to sound unusual in English, and then you're just kind of stuck with it. Yeah. No, that kid was a bully. He needed to be bullied back.
Last moment before we go, if you can do it in a moment. A lot of controversy and discussion around all sides with respect to what is popularly known as DEI, which takes some definition depending on what institution you're talking about and what programs you're talking about. What's your view of that phrase and that movement?
DEI takes those three words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and uses them in ways much more specific than what the sort of number one dictionary definitions would be. So a rhetorical strategy is to say, are you against diversity, equity, and inclusion? And of course, who is? But the question is,
well, some people are.
Well, some, but most people, including, people on the hard right, are not against equity, inclusion, and diversity. They're against what those three words mean in the mouths or the writings of certain people. And I frankly think that DEI and its ideology got pushed way too hard after March of 2020. And there's some excesses that do need to be pruned. But the way the Trump administration is doing it is ham-fisted, punitive, and mean. And so, unfortunately, we have traded one evil for another. And we're just going to have to wait to see how it plays out.
Well, I have more to ask about that, but we're out of time, and I know you have to go. Professor John McWhorter, the book is Pronoun Trouble, The Story of Us in 7 Little Words. Thanks for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Preet.